Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the M2 iPad Pro and compare it against the M1 iPad Air that is still readily available everywhere and see how both of these iPads hold up. Now, I will tell you, there's a lot of differences here, but there's also some similarity. If you want to go ahead and buy either one of these iPads though, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of both these iPads, there are a lot of differences and there's also a ton of similarity as well. The first thing you have to keep in mind though, is that there's a difference in price tags. The iPad Air 5 starts at $599. The iPad Pro 11-inch starts at $799. So that in and of itself is a pretty decent price gap. It's not the biggest price gap of all time, but the $200 that could make it or break it for you. Do keep in mind that the 12.9-inch iPad, that is, the Pro model, that's much bigger, is $1,099. So for this basis of this video, we'll be comparing the, base gen, the 11-inch models of both these. But do keep in mind that iPad Pro 12.9-inch model dwarfs all these other. But do keep in mind that, 12.9-inch iPad, towers over all these other iPads for sure. Now, color-wise, you are getting more color options on the iPad Air 5 than the iPad Pro 11-inch. So I think that's probably a big thing to keep in mind. That's something I've noticed, and I think that is probably a really cool thing too. Now, funny enough, displays are very interesting here. So on the iPad Air 5, according to Apple's website, it's a 10.9-inch liquid retina display. It's True Tone. It's a very good display. Now, it's funny they don't put 11 inches because the iPad Pro 11-inch, I guess, is slightly bigger because it does have a little bit less bezel around it, but I don't think it's that big of a deal. If you're looking at the iPad Air 5 and you're looking at the iPad Pro 11-inch, you probably assume they're around the same size. So I think the iPad Air 5 has a decent display. It's definitely not perfect, and I've definitely seen better panels out there, but it's not bad, and I would not go and upgrade from an iPad Air 5 to the iPad Pro 11 just because of the display. But I will say the iPad Pro 11 with its 11-inch liquid retina display, it has True Tone, which is great, very good panel, but also it has ProMotion. Now, I don't know, like I said, if I would go and upgrade just because of this, but this is one of the best features of the iPad Pro. I think it has one of the best panels right now, I would say, on most Apple products, probably not opposed to the 14 Pro Max, but this panel is very, very good, and the iPad Pro 12.9-inch model has an even better panel than this one. So I definitely love the iPad Pro 11-inch. I think it has a great panel for sure, and when it comes down to both these, the iPad Pro definitely has the better panel here. Now, another thing, the iPad Pro has Face ID, where the iPad Air 5 has Touch ID. So if that's a big deal to you, if you like unlocking things with your face, I personally don't really have a preference here, but it is a cool thing that you have kind of going for the iPad Pro 4. Now, on top of that, they both have USB-C ports on the bottom, but they are completely different. The iPad Air has just a standard USB-C port. There's still a lot of functionality there, but with the iPad Pro, you now have the USB-C port with Thunderbolt, which I think is really awesome. So having Thunderbolt right there is really cool, and personally, I think that's a really cool thing that you have going for with that specific iPad. Again, it's definitely not perfect, but it's a really cool thing that you have going for there. Now, they both have, flat sides, which feel very premium. They both support, Apple Pencil 2, which I think is perfect. And on the back, you have flat sides on both. You have their camera setups on the top left corner, which I think looks, pretty good for the most part. And again, I don't really have too much to complain about in this standpoint. I think both of them feel very premium. They both kind of share the same type of design for the most part. And I don't know if there's anything on the outside besides possibly the display where I'd be like, okay, like this is the far better one. The USB-C port is nice, but I think if you're okay with kind of like a decent iPad with kind of the basics, I think the iPad Air 5 is perfectly fine in that standpoint. Now, in the camera department, there's also some differences here too. So with the iPad Air 5, you have the 12 megapixel wide angle camera and you have a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera on the front. Now with the iPad Pro, you have the dual camera setup here. So you have a 12 megapixel wide and a 10 megapixel ultra wide camera. You also have a 12 megapixel, true depth camera system with ultra wide, whatever they're going to call it. Basically, the front cameras are very similar. The back camera is basically the main difference. Now, you're also getting a LiDAR sensor and that flash camera on the iPad Pro, which I think is really cool. Now, personally, as I've stated in every single one of my iPad comparisons I've ever made for years now, if you have an iPhone that's probably dropped within the last 2 to 3 years, you have a better camera in your pocket with your iPhone than you have on these iPads. So to kind of sway your opinion on, oh, this iPad is way better than this one because of the camera, I should go and get this one, it's not the best comparison. There's other reasons to do it in my opinion, unless you're using your iPad specifically for its camera. Like if you're trying to record something and you need an iPad with the best camera, then the iPad Pro is definitely the better way to go. But if it's like an option, then I would just say, the camera is probably one of the smaller things you have to worry about, considering the fact that your iPad camera may not even be as good as your iPhone 11 camera, if you think about it. So these things share a lot of similarity. I'll definitely tell you the iPad Pro has a better camera here, but you're just getting a few more features built in. You're getting like that ultra wide camera, which is nice. But otherwise, I personally don't really ever use my iPad Pro cameras. I don't really use my iPad cameras at all. The one time I really only used it was for a battery comparison I made 2 years ago. Other than that, I don't really use my iPad camera at all. So in terms of that kind of covers up the camera department. Now, in terms of software and longevity, they're both going to be supported with software for many, many more years to come. In fact, the same day the iPad Pro gets an update, 99 times out of 100, I'm sure, the iPad Air is going to be getting an update. So these things are going to be sharing a lot of similarity in that standpoint. It's not like you're going to go from one iPad to the other just based off the, software longevity. However, as I mentioned before, with the chipsets inside, with the M1 chip that's inside the iPad Air 5 and the M2 chipset that's inside the iPad Pro, there's going to be probably a lot of development Apple's going to be doing on both of these chipsets. But at the end of the day, Apple is probably going to focus more on that M2 chipset because it's newer. They want to go and, make sure you're spending more money on the Pros so you have more features there. And also, it is the newer chipset. The M1 chipset kind of came out in 2020. The M2 chipset came out technically in, 2022. So we could expect to see more improvements and more features added probably on the M2 chipset than on the M1 chipset. We're going to see what happens in the future, but in terms of that kind of covers it up here too, but this kind of leads us straight into the performance segment. And this is easily one of my favorite things to talk about. So from my opinion, right, I've owned the M1 MacBook Pro and the M1 MacBook Air, and I've owned the M2 MacBook Air. And in my experience, I've had great performance and great experience overall on both the M1 MacBook Pro, the M1 MacBook Air, and the M2 MacBook Air. I pretty much own all the M series of Macs so far, except for, I've owned all of them, even the Mac Studio. And I think it's a great thing Apple's doing, and I think they hold up very, very well. So if you're going and, you're using an M1 iPad Air, you're going to be getting great performance. I think they're great, and the base models of both of these have 8 gigabytes of RAM, but they do spec out to 16 gigabytes of RAM on the Pros. So if you need that much RAM, then obviously the Pros are the only option you have. But I will tell you, I would not be able to max out even like a base model iPad Air. I used an M1 MacBook Pro with 16 gigabytes of RAM for a long period of time. I didn't even need 16 gigabytes of RAM. Even though I'm editing a bunch of videos and I'm doing a few things here and there, I don't really feel like I would maximize the potential of an iPad Air if I'm being honest. With an iPad Pro, I think that is a tremendous iPad for sure. That thing has a bunch of capability. It's a very good iPad, and I love that iPad for sure. And it's definitely going to be the faster one in every single area. There's not really going to be too many points where you would look at an iPad Pro and be like, oh, well, maybe I would rather go for the iPad Air for the performance sake. It's not going to happen. The iPad Pro is definitely going to be the better one in the performance segment, but these M series of chipsets are so good that if you're perfectly okay with like personally for me, I would not be able to max out an iPad Air's performance level. I think the difference here that you would probably notice is that the iPad Pro is much smoother because of that ProMotion display. But if you need to, if you're playing a bunch of heavy intensive games, if you're going through and editing a bunch of videos, you're, doing a lot of those types of things, and you need an iPad that needs to be there, and, you are planning on split screen multitasking with a bunch of different applications and all those things, then obviously the iPad Pro might be the better way to go. But otherwise, I think if you're just taking notes, even beyond taking notes, if you're playing heavy intensive games and you're editing a bunch of videos and you're needing a workhorse of a machine, I still think the iPad Air 5 is going to be more than enough for you. But in that case, I might just sway you to get a MacBook at that point. But regardless, I think the iPad Air 5 is still very good performing, iPad as well. So this kind of wraps everything up. I will say a few other little minor things. They both support the Magic Keyboards, which is nice with those cases. They both work with the Apple Pencil too. Now the storage thing is a little interesting. The iPad Air 5 only goes up to 256 gigabytes of storage. The iPad Pro goes up to 2 terabytes. So that might be something you want to keep in mind too. But to wrap everything up, I'll probably tell you to save the most amount of money, the iPad Air 5 might be the better way to go. I feel like that one makes the most amount of sense to me personally to recommend the most amount of people. But if you aren't really on a budget and you want an iPad that's going to last you longer and give you better performance, then the iPad Pro is definitely a no-brainer. But I would say if you want to save the most amount of money, just go for the iPad Air 5. Regardless though, the decision is yours. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.